Hey everyone, I'm not sure where to start with this, but I guess I'll just jump right in because my head is spinning, and I could really use some advice. I've been married to my wife, Laura, for 5 years. We met in college, hit it off instantly, and after dating for a couple of years, we tied the knot. I genuinely thought we were happy. I mean, sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but nothing that ever felt like it would break us. Over the past few months, though, something felt off. Laura started working late more often than usual. She claimed it was because of a new project at her marketing firm, but it didn't add up. She was always exhausted, barely wanted to talk when she got home, and became super protective of her phone. It used to just sit on the kitchen counter, but now it was glued to her hand or face down with the ringer off. At first, I thought maybe she was stressed. I even tried to be supportive, cooked dinner, cleaned the apartment, did all the little things I thought might help. But the more I did, the more distant she seemed. It was like living with a stranger. There was this invisible wall between us, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get through. Then came the night everything changed. I remember it like it just happened, even though it's been a couple of weeks now. Laura said she had to work late, again. But something in her voice didn't sit right with me. It was too rehearsed, too casual. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I decided to check her location on Find My iPhone. We'd shared our locations for safety reasons, and I never had a reason to even think about it before. My heart nearly stopped when I saw she wasn't at her office. She was parked in a residential area across town, somewhere I knew she had no business being. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was meeting a client. Maybe she got lost. But deep down, I knew that I drove there. I don't even remember how I made it without crashing because my hands were shaking so bad. When I pulled up, I saw her car in the driveway of this modest-looking house. The lights were on. I sat there for what felt like hours, debating what to do. Eventually, curiosity and rage won over fear. I got out and walked up to the house, my heart pounding so loud I thought I'd pass out. I didn't even knock. The door wasn't fully closed, just slightly ajar like someone had been careless. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The sounds I heard will haunt me forever: laughter, hushed voices, and then her giggle, a giggle I hadn't heard directed at me in months. I turned a corner and saw them. Laura was on the couch, wrapped up in the arms of a man in uniform, a police officer. They looked so comfortable, like this was their routine. Like I was the outsider intruding on their life. She saw me first. Her face went pale, and she jumped up so fast she nearly tripped over the coffee table. "Mark! What are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice filled with panic, not guilt, just fear of being caught. I couldn't even form words. I just stood there, staring, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing, and that was just the beginning. The policeman stood up slowly, his hand instinctively resting on his belt, near his badge. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with that authoritative presence that made me feel small, even though this was my wife, my life he was intruding on. Laura was babbling, trying to explain, her words tumbling out in a jumbled mess. "Mark, it's not what it looks like. We were just talking. He's a friend from work." "A friend from work? In his uniform? In someone else's house?" I couldn't believe she had the audacity to lie to my face even when the evidence was literally wrapped around her. "Talking? Really, Laura? Is that what this is? Talking?" My voice sounded foreign to me, trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. The officer, whose name I later learned was Officer Daniels, tried to interject, "Hey man, let's just calm down here. No need to make this a bigger deal than it is." A bigger deal? I felt like my whole world was collapsing, and he thought it wasn't a big deal. I clenched my fists, feeling the adrenaline surge through me. But I didn't swing. I didn't yell. I just turned and walked out, my chest tight, my vision blurry. I could hear Laura calling after me, but her voice was distant, like it was echoing through a tunnel. I don't remember the drive home. I just know I ended up back in our apartment, sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed over and over texts, calls from Laura. I ignored them all. Eventually, she came home. She walked in like nothing happened, trying to act casual, her voice syrupy sweet. "Mark, can we talk?" I didn't even look at her. "Pack your stuff, Laura. We're done." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic. It was just a mistake. You're overreacting." Overreacting. That word snapped something inside me. I stood up, looked her dead in the eyes, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt absolutely nothing. No love, no sadness, just emptiness. "Pack your stuff." She rolled her eyes, muttered something under her breath about me being childish, and stormed into the bedroom. I listened to her shuffling around, slamming drawers, as I sat back down, feeling like a ghost in my own life that I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, thinking about every moment we'd shared, every promise she'd made, every lie she told. And I realized, this was just the beginning of the end. The morning after was surreal. The sun crept through the blinds like it did every other day, but nothing felt normal. I was still in the same spot on the couch where I'd been all night, surrounded by the silence that used to be comforting but now felt suffocating. Laura's suitcase sat by the door, half-zipped, with clothes spilling out like the mess she'd made of our marriage. She must have fallen asleep in the bedroom because I could hear her faint, rhythmic breathing calm, as if nothing had happened that I couldn't understand how she could sleep. How do you betray someone, rip apart their life, and then just drift off like it's no big deal? Eventually, she emerged, looking disheveled but unfazed, like this was just another argument we'd sweep under the rug. She had the nerve to pour herself a cup of coffee, taking slow sips while scrolling through her phone. No apology. No sign of remorse. Just casual indifference. "So, are we going to talk about last night or what?" she finally asked, not even bothering to look up. That I stared at her, my heart pounding, but this time not from heartbreak, just disbelief. "What's there to talk about, Laura? You lied. You cheated. End of story." She rolled her eyes, setting her coffee down with an exaggerated sigh. "Oh, grow up, Mark. It's not like I planned for this to happen. Things just happened." "Things don't just happen, Laura. You made choices." Repeatedly. My voice was calm, too calm, which scared me more than if I had shouted. She crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "You've been so distant lately. Always busy with work, never paying attention to me. What did you expect? I needed someone to talk to, someone who actually made me feel appreciated." There it was, the justification. The deflection. As if her betrayal was somehow my fault. I felt the anger rising, but I swallowed it down because I didn't want to give her that satisfaction. "So you found appreciation in the arms of a cop? That's your excuse?" Her face twisted with frustration. "At least he listens to me, Mark. You've been a ghost in this marriage for over a year. I didn't mean for it to go this far, but you checked out long before I did." That hit hard, not because it was true, but because she believed it was. I'd worked long hours, sure, but it was for us, for our future. All the late nights, the stress, it was to build something stable, something lasting. And while I was busy building, she was busy tearing it all down. That I couldn't do it anymore. "You need to leave." She stared at me, her jaw clenched, but something in my voice must have told her I meant it this time. No more discussions. No more second chances. She packed the rest of her things in silence, only breaking it once to say, "You'll regret this, Mark. You'll realize what you lost." But as the door clicked shut behind her, I felt the opposite. I didn't feel regret. I felt relief. The apartment was eerily quiet after she left. No footsteps pacing, no passive-aggressive sighs, no tension thick enough to choke on. Just silence, but relief didn't last long. The emptiness crept in quickly, filling every corner of the space we'd once called home. Memories hit me like waves our wedding day, lazy Sunday mornings, the inside jokes only we understood. They all felt tainted now, like someone had splashed ink over the pages of my life story that I sat on the floor, surrounded by the remnants of our life together, and for the first time since discovering her betrayal, I let myself cry. Not just tears full, gut-wrenching sobs that left me gasping for air. It wasn't just the loss of her, it was the loss of the life I thought we had, the future I thought we were building. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I must have fallen asleep right there on the floor. When I woke up, the sunlight had shifted, casting long shadows across the room. Reality settled back in like an unwelcome guest that I knew I couldn't stay in that apartment. Every corner, every piece of furniture held a memory I didn't want anymore. So, I grabbed my keys and left. No destination in mind, just away, driving aimlessly. I found myself at a park we used to visit when we first started dating. It was quiet, peaceful, everything my life wasn't. I sat on a bench, staring at nothing, wondering how the person I loved most became a stranger overnight. My phone buzzed. It was her. Again that I stared at the screen, her name flashing like a reminder of everything broken. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I blocked her number. It felt like reclaiming a small piece of control in a life that had spiraled out of it, but deep down, I knew this was far from over. Blocking Laura's number felt like a small victory, but the silence that followed was deafening. No more texts to ignore, no more calls to reject. Just me and the overwhelming reality of what my life had become, a hollow space where my marriage used to be. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I found myself checking into a cheap motel off the highway, the kind with flickering neon signs and a front desk clerk who didn't ask questions. The room smelled faintly of bleach and stale cigarettes, but it was better than facing the ghost of our apartment. I collapsed onto the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together how everything unraveled so quickly. Sleep was impossible. My mind replayed everything like a twisted highlight reel, the way she laughed with him, the lies she told with such ease, and the look on her face when she got caught. Not guilt. Not sorrow. Just annoyance that her secret was out. By morning, I felt numb. I hadn't eaten in over 24 hours, but the thought of food made me nauseous. I checked out of the motel, aimlessly driving until I found myself parked outside my best friend Dave's house. Dave and I had been friends since high school, the kind of friend who knew all your embarrassing stories but never held them against you. When he opened the door, his face shifted from confusion to concern in seconds. "Dude, what happened? You look like hell." I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. All I could manage was, "Laura cheated." Dave didn't ask questions. He just pulled me into a bear hug, the kind that says, "I've got you," without needing words. We sat in his living room, and for the first time, I told someone everything, every detail, every emotion. He listened without interrupting, just letting me unload the weight I'd been carrying. When I finally finished, he leaned back and said, "Man, I don't even know what to say. That's messed up. But you're here now, and you're not alone in this." Hearing that felt like a lifeline. I wasn't alone, even if it felt that way. The next few days blurred together. I crashed on Dave's couch, avoiding my apartment like it was contaminated. Every time I thought about going back, I pictured Laura's face, her dismissive laughter, and I just couldn't do it. But life doesn't pause for heartbreak. Bills still needed to be paid. Work emails piled up. Eventually, I forced myself to face reality. I went back to the apartment, half expecting her to be there, but it was empty. The silence was suffocating, but I pushed through. I started packing her things. Not neatly, just shoving everything into boxes, not caring what got crumpled or broken. It wasn't out of spite, I just wanted every trace of her gone. Every sweater, every framed photo, every little note she'd left me over the years. They all went into boxes, taped shut like sealing away bad memories. While packing, I found something tucked in the back of our closet, a small shoebox filled with letters. Love letters from me, written during our early years. But that's not what stopped me. Mixed in with them were recent notes, from him. Officer Daniels. Crumpled napkins with scribbled words, little post-it notes with inside jokes I didn't understand. That's when it hit me, this wasn't some accidental fling. This had been going on for a while. They had a history, routines, private jokes. She hadn't just cheated, she'd built a parallel life right under my nose. The rage that surged through me was blinding. I grabbed the box, stormed outside, and without thinking, I set it on fire. Watching the flames consume those pieces of my past felt cathartic, but when the fire died down, I was left with nothing but ashes and the crushing realization that no matter how much I burned, I couldn't erase what happened. That I thought about confronting Officer Daniels, about showing up at his station and demanding answers. But what would that accomplish? He wasn't the one who made vows to me. He wasn't the one who promised forever. That was all on Laura. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't need her explanations or excuses. Instead, I met with a lawyer. Filing for divorce was both the hardest and easiest thing I've ever done. Signing those papers felt like closing a chapter, but it also felt like admitting defeat. The end of us. Walking out of that lawyer's office, I realized something: I was free. Not just from Laura, but from the lies, the constant doubt, the emotional roller coaster. It didn't erase the pain, but it was a start to something new, even if I had no idea what that was. In the weeks that followed, life became a strange routine, a hollow rhythm of waking up, going to work, and pretending like I wasn't falling apart inside. Every day felt like I was walking through fog, with brief flashes of clarity that hit like sharp needles, the sound of her laugh in a stranger's voice, a familiar perfume wafting by, or passing a patrol car on the street. Little reminders that pierced through the numbness and brought it all crashing back. The apartment was the hardest part. Even with all her things gone, it still felt like she was there. The coffee mug she always used sat untouched in the cupboard. The small dent on the couch cushion where she'd curl up every evening stared back at me like an echo of what used to be. I couldn't escape it. One night, after too many beers and not enough food, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There we were, smiling at a beach in Maui, laughing at some wedding, posing in front of our first apartment. It was like watching someone else's life, one I no longer recognized. That's when I realized I'd been doing everything wrong. I was trying to erase her, to burn the memories, box them up, throw them away. But the problem wasn't the memories. The problem was me, stuck in them. The next morning, hungover and raw, I made a decision. I needed to reclaim my life, not just exist in the ruins of what she left behind. I started small. I rearranged the furniture not because it needed to be, but because it made the space feel different, less like our apartment and more like mine. I painted the bedroom walls a new color, swapped out the sheets, donated the old throw pillows she picked out. Little changes, but each one felt like peeling away a layer of her hold on my life. Dave noticed the shift. One evening, he showed up unannounced with a six-pack and a plan. "You need to get out, man. Enough moping. Let's hit the bar, watch the game, maybe even talk to people who aren't me." I resisted at first. The thought of small talk, of pretending I was okay, sounded exhausting. But eventually, I caved. The bar was loud and crowded, filled with people who had no idea my life was in shambles. It was oddly comforting. No one looked at me with pity. No one knew I was the guy whose wife cheated with a cop. I was just Mark, a random guy at a bar. A woman approached us. She was confident, striking, with a smile that could disarm anyone. She introduced herself as Emily. We talked nothing deep, just surface-level chatter about music, favorite movies, and bad bar food. It wasn't flirtatious, not really. But it was normal. And I needed normal. Before leaving, she scribbled her number on a napkin and handed it to me with a playful grin. "Call me sometime, if you want to." I didn't call her, not because I wasn't interested, but because I wasn't ready. She represented a future I wasn't sure I could face yet. But that napkin stayed in my wallet, a small token of proof that maybe, just maybe, there was life beyond Laura. Days turned into weeks, and while the pain dulled, it never fully disappeared. One afternoon, as I was leaving work, I saw Laura standing by her car in the parking lot. My heart jumped into my throat. She looked the same but different. Maybe it was the way the light hit her face, or maybe it was because I was finally seeing her without the rose-colored glasses I used to wear. She noticed me, her expression shifting from surprise to something softer. She took a tentative step forward. "Mark, hey." Her voice was familiar, but it didn't sting like I thought it would. It just felt distant. "What do you want, Laura?" I kept my tone flat, guarded. I wanted to see how you're doing." She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit I knew all too well. That I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Why? Guilt finally catching up to you?" She flinched, but recovered quickly. "I made mistakes. I know that. I just thought maybe we could talk." I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt nothing. She was just a person, standing there, trying to poke holes in the life I was slowly rebuilding. "There's nothing left to talk about." I turned and walked away, not because I was trying to make a point, but because I genuinely didn't have anything else to say. She was part of my past, and I was finally okay with leaving her there. That night, I pulled out the napkin from my wallet. Emily's number stared back at me, a simple invitation I'd been too scared to accept. This time, I picked up my phone and dialed. The phone rang 3 times before Emily picked up. "Hello?" Her voice was bright, casual, like she wasn't expecting anything in particular. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Hey, it's Mark. From the bar. Dave's friend." I felt awkward, like a teenager calling his first crush, but there was something grounding about it too, like I was reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost somewhere between betrayal and heartbreak. There was a pause, then a warm chuckle. "Took you long enough." That simple response broke the ice, and suddenly, the weight on my chest felt a little lighter. We talked for an hour, about nothing and everything. She told me about her job as a graphic designer, her love for bad horror movies, and her talent for burning toast, even though she swore she was a decent cook. I found myself laughing, real, genuine laughter. The kind I hadn't felt in months. We agreed to meet for coffee later that week. Not a date, just coffee. But the idea of it was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The day of our meeting, I stood in front of my mirror longer than I'd care to admit, debating whether I looked like someone trying too hard. It wasn't about impressing her, it was about not looking like a man still drowning in his past. Eventually, I settled on something simple and left before I could overthink it. Emily was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with a book in her hands. She looked up, her face lighting up with a smile that immediately eased my nerves. "Hey, stranger," she greeted as I slid into the seat across from her. The conversation flowed easily, like we were old friends catching up. She had this way of making everything feel light, effortless. No pressure, no expectations, just two people sharing stories over coffee. But somewhere in the middle of our conversation, my mind drifted. Not because I was bored, but because I realized how far I'd come. A few weeks ago, I was a broken man sitting in a dark apartment, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed. And now, here I was, laughing with someone new, feeling hope sneak back into my heart. After coffee, we decided to take a walk. The air was crisp, the kind that hinted at the changing seasons. We passed street vendors, little shops, and even a street musician playing a song I vaguely recognized. It was simple, ordinary, but it felt like a milestone. As we reached her car, there was a brief pause, that unspoken moment where both people wonder what's next. She looked at me with a soft smile. "I had a good time, Mark." "Me too," I replied, meaning every word. I didn't kiss her. Not because I didn't want to, but because it wasn't about that. It was about feeling normal again. Feeling like myself. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Not just for new connections, but for myself. I realized healing wasn't about replacing what I'd lost. It was about rebuilding, piece by piece, even if some of those pieces were unfamiliar. Later that night, as I sat in my now slightly rearranged apartment, my phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Thanks for today. You're easy to talk to." I stared at the message, a small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. Not because I thought this was the start of some grand romance, but because it was proof that life moves on even when you think it can't. But just as I was settling into this new sense of calm, my phone buzzed again. A new message, not from Emily. It was from an unknown number. "We need to talk. It's important. Laura." And just like that, the past came knocking again. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. "We need to talk. It's important." The words felt like a stone dropped into the calm waters I'd finally managed to find. My heart didn't race like it did when I first found out about the affair, but there was an undeniable tension coiling in my chest, a dull, familiar ache I thought I'd left behind. I didn't respond right away. I set the phone down, trying to focus on anything else: the muted hum of traffic outside, the soft flicker of the lamp in the corner, the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking. But none of it mattered. The text sat there like an unanswered question, taunting me. After what felt like hours, I picked up the phone again and typed a simple reply: "What do you want, Laura?" Her response was almost immediate. "Please, just meet me. It's not about us. It's important. Not about us." That phrase echoed in my mind. I didn't owe her anything, not after what she'd done. But curiosity is a tricky thing. Despite everything, part of me needed to know what was so urgent. We agreed to meet at a small park halfway between our old apartment and her new place. Neutral ground. The sun was setting when I arrived, casting long shadows across the empty benches and leaf-strewn paths. I spotted her immediately, sitting alone, clutching a coffee cup like it was her lifeline. She looked different. Not physically, she was still the same Laura, but there was something in her posture, her face. Less confident, more fragile. A stark contrast to the woman who had laughed off our marriage like it was an inconvenience. I approached cautiously, hands in my pockets, keeping my distance. "You've got 5 minutes," I said, my voice colder than I intended. She looked up, her eyes tired, rimmed with dark circles. "Mark, thank you for coming." I didn't respond. I just waited. She took a deep breath, then blurted out, "It's about Daniels." I blinked. "Daniels? You mean the cop you—" "Yes," she cut me off, her voice low, like she didn't want anyone else to hear. "I know you don't care, and I deserve that. But he's not who I thought he was." I raised an eyebrow, folding my arms. "Let me guess, he cheated on you too? Karma's a funny thing." She flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "No, Mark. It's not like that. I think he's dangerous." That caught me off guard. "Dangerous? What are you talking about?" She glanced around nervously before continuing. After everything, he got weird. Controlling. Obsessive. At first, I thought it was just his personality, but it's more than that. He's been following me, showing up at my work, even when I didn't tell him where I'd be. And yesterday, I think he was outside my apartment. Just standing there. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, chalk it up to the mess she'd made. But there was something in her eyes, real fear. The same woman who'd confidently dismantled our marriage now looked over her shoulder like a shadow was following her. "So, what do you expect me to do about it?" I asked, my tone sharper than intended. "I don't know," she snapped, then softened. I don't have anyone else to turn to. You know him, sort of. You saw how he is. Please, Mark. Just, help me figure this out. I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated. This wasn't my problem. She'd made her choices. She'd picked him. But despite everything, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't making this up. What do you mean, figure it out? I finally asked. She hesitated, then pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, a note. It was simple, just a few words scrawled in messy handwriting, "You're mine. Don't forget that." No name. No signature. But something about it sent a chill down my spine. "I found this on my car windshield yesterday," she whispered. "I think it was him." I didn't respond right away. I was too busy staring at the note, feeling an unease settle over me. Maybe this wasn't just about a broken marriage anymore. Maybe it was something darker. "I'll look into it," I said quietly, surprising even myself. Laura's eyes filled with tears, not the manipulative kind, but genuine fear. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just stepped into something I wasn't prepared for, and deep down, I knew this was far from over. The note haunted me all the way home. "You're mine. Don't forget that." Simple, but heavy with implications. The handwriting was sloppy, rushed, like someone had written it in anger. My mind kept circling back to Officer Daniels. I didn't know the guy beyond the brief, ugly encounter in that house, but his arrogance, the way he tried to dismiss me like I was the problem, it all felt off. Now, hearing Laura's story, that unease had morphed into something colder. I tossed the note onto my kitchen counter and stared at it like it held the answers. It didn't. Just ink on paper. But it was more than that. It was the first thread in a tangled mess I hadn't asked to be part of. I didn't sleep that night. My brain refused to shut off, racing through possibilities. What if Laura was overreacting? What if she was lying again? But no, that fear in her eyes was real. And as much as I hated to admit it, part of me still felt responsible, not for her mistakes, but for the fact that I'd been tangled up in this mess in the first place. By morning, I had a plan. If Daniels was stalking her, he'd likely keep doing it. People like that don't just stop. They escalate. I needed to know more about him, and I knew exactly where to start. Dave. I showed up at his place unannounced again, knocking harder than necessary. He opened the door, still half asleep, his hair a mess and his eyes squinting against the morning light. "Mark? Dude, it's Saturday. What's going on?" I shoved the note into his hand. "This. Laura thinks Daniels is stalking her." Dave's brow furrowed as he read it. "Daniels? The cop?" He rubbed his face, waking up fast. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious." He sighed, stepping aside to let me in. His apartment was the usual mess: empty pizza boxes, laundry piles, but none of it registered. My focus was on Daniels. "Look," Dave said, sitting on the edge of his couch, "I've got a buddy who works at the precinct. Maybe he can tell us something about Daniels, if he's got a record, complaints, whatever." I nodded. "I need to know if Laura's in real danger or if she's just dragging me into more drama." Dave made the call. His friend, Mike, was a patrol officer with access to internal reports. They talked for a few minutes, hushed tones, with Dave glancing at me occasionally. When he hung up, his face was tense. "What did he say?" I pressed. "Daniels has a reputation," Dave replied quietly. "Nothing official, but Mike says he's known for being intense. Overly aggressive, even with other officers. There've been whispers about misconduct, but nothing that stuck. Seems like he's good at keeping things just under the radar." My gut tightened. This wasn't just paranoia. Something was off with Daniels. "What do we do?" I asked. Dave hesitated, then said, "We keep an eye on him. If he's stalking Laura, he'll show up again. And when he does, we'll be ready." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. Later that evening, I parked near Laura's new apartment, far enough to not be obvious but close enough to watch. Dave was with me, his car a few blocks down, just in case. It felt surreal, like we were in some low-budget detective movie. But the tension was real, the stakes personal. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Just the usual traffic, people walking dogs, the occasional neighbor coming and going. I started to think maybe Laura was wrong. Then I saw him, Daniels, that he wasn't in uniform, but I recognized him immediately. Same build, same arrogant swagger. He stood across the street from Laura's building, leaning casually against a lamppost like he was waiting for someone. But he wasn't meeting anyone. He was just watching. That I snapped a photo with my phone, my heart pounding. He's here, I texted Dave. Daniels didn't move for almost an hour, just standing there, occasionally glancing at his phone. Then, without warning, he crossed the street and headed straight for Laura's building. That I jumped out of my car, adrenaline surging. I didn't have a plan beyond stop him. Dave appeared moments later, having sprinted from his car. We intercepted Daniels just as he reached the front steps. "Hey!" I shouted. He turned, surprised, but quickly masked it with that smug expression I remembered too well. "Mark, right? This isn't your business." "It became my business when you started stalking my ex-wife," I snapped. He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "I'm not stalking anyone. Just checking on a friend." Dave stepped forward, his stance tense. "You've been standing out here for an hour. That's not checking in. That's creepy." Daniel's face darkened. "You should both back off. You don't know what you're messing with. And you don't know who you're messing with," Dave shot back. For a tense moment, none of us moved. Then Daniels smirked, that same arrogant grin that made my blood boil. "This isn't over," he muttered, brushing past us as he walked away. We didn't follow. We didn't need to, because now, it was personal and I wasn't going to let him win. The moment Daniels disappeared around the corner, a weight settled in my chest, a feeling I couldn't shake. His words echoed in my head, "This isn't over." They weren't just words, they were a threat wrapped in a smug grin. Dave and I stood in silence for a minute, both of us processing what had just happened. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the pavement. "He's not just some jealous guy," Dave finally muttered, his jaw clenched. "There's something off about him." "Yeah," I replied, my voice low. "And it's not just Laura he's got a problem with." We walked up to Laura's apartment. I didn't want to, but I needed to warn her. I wasn't doing it for her, I was doing it because I didn't trust Daniels not to escalate. She opened the door almost immediately, like she'd been waiting. Her face was pale, her eyes darting past me to the street. "Was he here?" she asked, her voice a whisper. I nodded. "Yeah. We confronted him. He didn't deny it. Said he was just checking in." Her face crumpled for a brief second before she forced herself to stay composed. "I knew it. I knew he wouldn't stop." We stepped inside. The apartment was small, barely furnished, with boxes still unpacked. It wasn't a home, it was a hiding place. She perched on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling slightly. "What do we do now?" she asked. Dave leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You need to file a restraining order." Laura shook her head. "He's a cop. You really think that'll stop him? Or that his buddies won't cover for him?" She had a point. Daniels wasn't just any guy, he had power, connections. That's what made this so dangerous. "We get proof," I said after a moment. "Enough that even his badge can't protect him." The plan formed quickly after that. It wasn't complicated, we'd catch him in the act. If Daniels was stalking Laura, he'd slip up eventually. We just had to be ready when he did. Dave stayed with her that night while I went home. Sleep was impossible. I kept replaying the confrontation in my head, analyzing every word, every gesture. There was something in Daniel's eyes that unsettled me, not just arrogance, but something darker. A need for control. The next day, we set up cameras around Laura's apartment. Small, discreet, covering every angle: the front door, the street below, even inside her living room. Dave's friend Mike helped with some of the equipment, under the guise of home security. He didn't ask too many questions, but I could tell he suspected more. For days, nothing happened. Daniels disappeared, like he'd never been there. But I knew better. He was watching. Waiting. Then, one night, the cameras caught something that I was reviewing the footage at my apartment when I saw him. Daniels. He was standing across the street again, just outside the camera's range, but his silhouette was unmistakable. He stayed there for hours, barely moving, just watching. Then he did something that sent a chill down my spine. That he walked up to Laura's car, crouched down, and did something near the tires. I couldn't see exactly what, but when he stood up and walked away, there was a small, dark object left behind, tucked discreetly near the wheel. That I grabbed my keys and drove to Laura's place, my heart racing. Dave met me outside, and we carefully approached the car. It was a GPS tracker. Daniels wasn't just stalking her, he was tracking her movements. That we took photos, documented everything, then called Mike. He showed up in plain clothes, his expression darkening when he saw the tracker. "This is bad," he muttered. "Really bad. I'll take this to someone I trust, but you need to be careful. If Daniels realizes you're onto him, he could get desperate." That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I double-checked my own car, my apartment, even my phone. Paranoia crept in, but it wasn't without reason. Daniels had crossed a line. The next morning, Laura's phone rang. It was an unknown number. She put it on speaker. "Thought you could outsmart me?" Daniels' voice crackled through the speaker, calm but laced with menace. "You're making a big mistake." Then the line went dead. We sat in stunned silence, the weight of his words sinking in. This wasn't just about Laura anymore. Daniels had made it personal, and I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The call changed everything. Daniels wasn't hiding anymore. He wanted us to know he was watching. The subtle stalking had morphed into something bolder, more dangerous. I could feel it in my gut. This wasn't just about Laura. This was about control. About dominance. And now, it was about me too. After the call, Dave and I sat in Laura's apartment, trying to figure out our next move. The walls felt like they were closing in, the silence between us heavier than any words. We couldn't keep playing defense. We needed to end this. "We take this to internal affairs," Dave finally said, breaking the tension. "With the footage, the tracker, the call logs, it's enough to start an investigation." Laura hesitated, her fear palpable. What if it makes him worse? What if it pushes him over the edge? I looked at her, then at Dave, realizing the truth. Daniels was already over the edge. Waiting for him to escalate wasn't an option. "We're not giving him that power," I said firmly. "It ends now." The next day, Mike connected us with an internal affairs officer named Detective Harper. She was sharp, no nonsense, and after reviewing the evidence, her expression hardened. "This isn't the first complaint we've had about Daniels," she admitted quietly. "But this is solid. We'll take it from here." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this nightmare was finally over. But Daniels had other plans. 3 days later, I came home to find my apartment door ajar. My heart raced as I pushed it open, every instinct on high alert. The place was trashed, drawers pulled out, furniture overturned. But nothing was stolen. This wasn't a robbery, this was a message. Pinned to the wall with a knife was a photo, me and Laura, from years ago, smiling like idiots in front of our first apartment. Across it, scrawled in thick black marker, were the words, "You should have stayed out of it." I called Dave immediately. He arrived within minutes, his face pale as he took in the scene. "He's unhinged," he muttered. "We need to get Laura somewhere safe." We found her at work and brought her to Dave's place. She was shaking when I showed her the photo, her fear mirrored in my own chest. But beneath the fear, something shifted: anger. I was done being afraid. Daniels wanted me to feel powerless, but I refused to give him that satisfaction. The next morning, Harper called. "We've got him," she said. "Caught him trying to plant another tracker on your car. He's in custody." Relief washed over me, but it was tangled with disbelief. After everything, it felt almost too easy. But it was real. He was caught. The trial was quick. The evidence was overwhelming: stalking, harassment, abuse of power. Daniel sat in court with that same smug grin, but it didn't last. The verdict was guilty. The sentence: prison time. No badge could save him now. After the trial, Laura approached me outside the courthouse. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes filled with a complicated mix of gratitude and regret. That I nodded, but there was nothing left to say. Our chapter was over. Months passed. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least a new version of it. I moved to a new apartment, far from the memories that haunted the old one. Dave and I remained close, the bond forged in chaos unbreakable, and one day, out of the blue, I found that napkin with Emily's number, tucked in the back of a drawer I'd forgotten to clean out during the move. I smiled, not because I thought it was fate or some grand sign, but because it reminded me that life moves on. So, I dialed. "Hey," she answered, her voice warm and familiar. "Long time no call." "Yeah," I replied, feeling a strange sense of peace. "But I think I'm ready now." Because I was. Finally.